Good day. My name is Jamie Coulter. I'm the CEO of Raymond James in Canada. Joining me this afternoon is Ayoung, Senior Vice President and Head of Human Resources for Raymond James as well. Robin, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Over the course of the next little bit here, Robin and I are going to cover some interesting and important topics. We're going to discuss the importance of diversity and culture broadly in the wealth management industry, and then specifically at Raymond James. We're going to highlight examples of how firms like ours can help support and boost diversity and inclusion. And then lastly, highlight how Raymond James values putting clients first, acting with integrity, valuing independence, and thinking long-term are reflected on our culture today. Action-packed. So looking forward to it. Thanks again for taking the time, Robin.
No problem. Thanks.
So I think what I might start off with is the following. You've worked in the HR space for more than 2 decades, and specifically within the financial services sector for the past 10 years. And what are some of the shifts you've observed in our industry and how it approaches corporate culture, diversity and inclusion issues? And perhaps where have you seen the most progress? And at the same time, the flip side of that coin is, where do you see the most room for improvement?
So thanks again for having me. Happy to take that one. I mean, I would start off by saying, I definitely feel it hasn't been sort of one massive shift. It's been a series of different things happening, maybe seemingly at odd times, but also all together. So if you look back 10 or 15 years, my sense was most organizations, even in the wealth space, sort of knew diversity was the right thing to do, right? There was enough body of work that they realized, or we realized that was something to sort of focus on. Then you had sort of other things happening at the sort of socio and economic level, where you had different generations coming into the workforce, and those different generations had different level of awareness and sensitivity of sort of what type of organizations they want to work for. You had things happening socially, the amplification of social media and the continued growth of it, where something could happen halfway across the world, but because of social media, we were able to share that and maybe shrink the world a bit, where people had access to information very quickly. Then you had the sort of ongoing war for talent, and realizing, how do we continue to broaden the areas where we can find talent? Many would say sort of the culmination around the real sort of point of inflection was, the murder of George Floyd, and the fact that happened during COVID, where a lot of us were home and pinned to our TV screens, and the level of awareness and involvement that we all had in that sort of continued to amplify sort of our involvement and around the issues of diversity. So I think that's some of the sort of major shifts that we continue to see. Yeah. In terms of areas where I think we've made some really good progress, I think the general level of awareness, the access that organizations are allowing and creating their employees to have to diversity, and building that level of awareness. Like, to me, the diversity space is really about learning. It's about being open to experience different things or a different perspective, and the ability for, whether it's resource groups or programs that are run, all of those things continue to build a level of awareness. We have a lot more organizations investing meaningfully in diversity initiatives and actions, and I think all of those things are an advantage in terms of making progress. Conversely, the one thing that I would say we continue to sort of want to see more improvement in is, a lot of organizations have a very maybe siloed or vertical view of diversity. So diversity is something that's important, and we're doing that in a silo. And increasingly, there's real importance in making sure that diversity exists on a horizontal plane, like from our recruitment to our compensation systems to the way we communicate and how we communicate. Diversity should find itself in all of those things, and I think that's where you get incrementally more progress and more sustainability in some of those things, if you continue to integrate it in how we do things, as opposed to a thing to do.
I think that's a really interesting point, and where it starts to become embedded within the fabric of a company's operations, and it becomes less top down and almost becomes sort of more organic and kind of bottom up, right? And so you talked about inclusion groups, and I've watched the development of various inclusion groups here at Raymond James over time, and one thing that is kind of particularly gratifying from my perspective is they're all grassroots, right?
Yep.
They're not forming because they've been told to form. They're forming because various individuals want them to form, and then they sort of reach out to you and I and others on the senior leadership team for the kind of the support and the endorsement of like, how do we go from here? Just
Correct.
any perspective on that? Like, would you consider that a good sign of progress over time?
I would say that is a great sign of progress. My sense as well is it's a testimony to the environment and the culture. And I know part of your question involved culture around, are we creating a space where a group of employees can feel strongly about something and can be confident and comfortable enough to come forward and engage the senior leadership team for sponsorship, for investment, for a listening ear, for a different perspective? We most recently had one group form, and that process of them coming together and coming to pitch their ideas, and the level of interest that the team had around hearing them, providing feedback, and creating a situation where today, we're able to form that resource group. I think that's where the role that organizations play, where we're creating a bit of an incubator where if you feel strongly about those things and you want to do something in that space, there's opportunities for you to actually put your hand up and lend a hand towards those things. So I think it is a really good indication around sort of the culture that we're trying to create, where employees feel comfortable to step forward in that way.
And I wonder too, and you mentioned this earlier, it seems sort of a function of we've got a multi-generational workforce today, and spread across a variety of decades, and expectations are definitely evolving. Associated expectations of their employer continue to evolve, and it's somewhat incumbent upon us to work with and evolve along with those expectations. And I think some of the good work that's happening in this area is supporting the needs of those groups, and hopefully leads to a good outcome for all.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Switch over and look at our advisors. And so we're primarily a wealth management firm here in Canada. At Raymond James, our advisors have significant independence in deciding how to structure and run their businesses. And they own their books, they own their client books, they own the relationships. We're here to support and nurture them along the way, but they do have that the higher degree of independence than perhaps other groups might. What role do you see for our firm and others in that independent channel of the wealth management industry to encourage diversity and foster an inclusive culture, and then at the same time respecting advisor independence?
So I have to confess, when I was sort of going through my interview process and sort of joining the Raymond James family, full transparency, that was one of the things that was a bit of a double-edged sword. I love the concept of it and the arrangement, and it really intrigued me, but I also knew it would also have the other side where you need to make sure you're both working on the same side and pulling in the same directions. But when I look at my own career, sort of every time that I've seen real progress or accomplishment is when you have a situation where there's active engagement, there's a healthy tension and challenge between those parties, but at the end of the day, we're all focused on the same outcome. We all want to make the organization better, or we all want to achieve a particular outcome. And I think that model that you've described is a scaled up version of that. We because of that relationship, we're encouraged and driven to engage differently. we get a lot more input. Those independents are equal partners in terms of how we execute, and they also have really great ideas on things we should do or things we should do differently. And because of that sort of healthy tension or relationship that we have, we're able to put that on the table and have a discussion. I would say many of the ways that we've sort of rolled out initiatives and done things have been improved and optimized because we've created, just to the point we've raised before, an environment where people can raise those concerns, challenge our thought process, have us, sharpen ourselves around how we're going to go to market or how we're going to roll a particular thing out, or what are we going to focus on from that perspective. So there's absolutely a lot more pros than cons. And I think it allows us to come up ultimately with better decisions and ultimately better outcomes, specifically in that DEI space, right? We taking that feedback and making sure that we're focusing on what the organization and our associates are asking for always ends up with a better end product from my perspective.
I think that's really I think you're bang on the use of the term healthy tension, and again, I think as you correctly point out, there are more pros to cons than with the approach that we're taking. And I think you're right. You end up with, I think, a deeper level of engagement as a result.
Yep.
And again, I think that we're sort of seeing that manifested again in the creation of employee resource groups, that are happening on their own, not because management has said we'd like to see one. So no, I appreciate that perspective, and I think I can recall back in the interview process we spent a little bit of time on this topic and kind of understanding how the Raymond James culture works and how our relationships with our advisor community is how that's different than perhaps some other organizations.
Those were very helpful conversations, I'll give you that.
I appreciate that. Now, switching gears a little bit, we talked a little bit about the firm. Let's step back and take a look at the industry as a whole. And candidly, the wealth management industry has rightfully been criticized for being a bit of an old boys club and lacking diversity. And so despite some slow progress in recent years, there's still, everyone would say, I think myself included, there's a lot of room for improvement. What are we already doing to address these issues? And what further steps do you think Raymond James can take to make our firm and our industry even more welcoming and diverse?
So very good question. And I think I would start off by saying, that feedback from an industry perspective, it resonates. It does. It's not something full transparency, I like hearing, but that is the reality or where we've come from as an industry. And I think instead of it should sort of propel us to want to sort of, deconstruct that a bit. And I think there's a couple of things that either we do as RJL and the industry is doing as well and should continue to do. The first one for me is really you have to be into the numbers. All right. Like the first sort of foundational step is what are we doing in that space from a DEI metric perspective? Because that's the truth. That's the measurable component of what our gender mix is and what our diversity representation is. So, if you're not able to sort of capture and baseline and demonstrate progress, it's really difficult to tell a story or track progress. So I think the first thing, and again, this would be what we focused on, is around strengthening our ability to drive data, whether it's our continued campaign on self-ID. We have close to 50% plus of our organization that continue to provide us information around their own sort of diversity segmentations. And that data is intricate for us to be able to use, drive, and sort of figure out where we are and where we want to be. And that data is also helpful to allow us to sort of plan and project where we want to be and what are the areas or where are the areas that we want to sort of really focus on from that perspective. The next thing that we've absolutely focused on, and I think any organization in the industry should really be concerned around, is the significant inflows and outflows. From an HR perspective, it's all about what are we doing on our talent acquisition and recruitment activity, and what's happening, again, from a data insight perspective on our turnover perspective. Any organization that wants to move the needle in that DEI space absolutely needs to have a handle on what's coming in and what's going out, and how are we playing in that space. So whether it's our partnership with external partners that allow us greater access to diverse talent pools, whether it's making sure that our talent acquisition process is open to and sensitive to sort of the diversity segments and the needs that some of these candidates have, whether it's identifying specific minimum targets that we assign to ourselves as part of our talent acquisition and recruitment activity. All of those sort of send a message and drive the underscore of, here's what we want to do in that space and how we want to do it, and being involved in the data around turnover. That is also very helpful to make sure we're aware of what's coming in and what's going out from that perspective. Finally, for me, and this is something that I think the industry can do a lot more of, and we ourselves are continuing to see opportunities where we can expand, is around talent management and early talent especially. I think one of the challenges of this industry is, people can enter it from a host of different areas and different sort of capabilities, and our ability to invest as an organization in early talent, whether it's outreach to universities, creating internship opportunities for young students who are interested and maybe don't even fully understand what that this sector has to offer, is hugely important. One of those 4 or 5 week exposures could literally change the trajectory of someone's career. And I think the more that we do so as an organization and we do so as a sector, it's really around investing in the future generations and making sure that we're creating opportunities for them, to enter the sector, but also to thrive in it and sort of appeal and attract different types of talent to the industry. So I think those are really the 3 or 4 areas where RJL has continued to sort of focus our attention on. And I would also say I think that's an area where the wider sector should also continue to drive.
Those are all great points. And again, I remember I'm going to go back to our interview process a number of months ago, and you did a great job articulating the importance of an employee value proposition, and that still sticks with me. As I often think of the client value proposition from the advisor's perspective out to their clients, but the employee value proposition is equally as important. I would say that one interesting learning from my perspective over the last number of months, in no small part to conversations you and I have had, is that sometimes hiring, it's not that hiring for diversity and hiring for merit are they're not mutually exclusive, right? They're actually intertwined, and sort of even just thinking about just the hiring process, making it a little bit different, as you said, making sure you've got the data so you kind of have some idea of what the workforce looks like today. Maybe getting an understanding of what your hiring process is. So that's talent acquisition. Are we casting a net that's wide enough to make sure we're actually hiring the best from the biggest pool that we possibly can? Any comments on that issue?
My mind also goes back to the employee value proposition stuff, and I think from our perspective, it's important how wide that is. A lot of times when you think of an employee value proposition, the focus is around sort of base salary and bonuses, and I think that's a feature of it. But even if I would take you back to your first question that you asked around culture, a lot of it is that. A lot of it is, does the organization that I work for have an alignment to my what's important to me as an individual?
Yeah.
Do I feel like there's some alignment from that perspective? Do I have the opportunity to work with a great team and learn and expand my opportunities and acquire new skills? Do I feel like I'm working for an organization that sort of from a strategy perspective has a strategy to win? All of those things add up to that employee value proposition, and increasingly so if you listen to some of the podcasts and some of the more recent sort of information that's coming up, increasingly so, things like trust and stability and culture are increasingly becoming the things that many of, especially our newer entrant generations, are focusing on when it comes to a career choice or an organizational choice in terms of where they want to work. And I think it's really important for organizations to sort of broaden the scope of what their employee value proposition is. And secondly, be in a position where we're comfortable speaking about it. We know what those elements are. We know what attracts people to Raymond James. And we're in a position where we can speak about it in a comfortable way, and it's not like we're grasping for straws, right? The ability for us to be able to have those conversations and paint that picture, I think, is hugely important, especially if when we're in a position where we can do that, particularly to diverse segments of our society, where we can pitch that employee value proposition and speak to it powerfully. I think it's really important, particularly as a responsibility as a senior leader in the organization.
Couldn't agree more. And I might just take this opportunity to sort of tie some of what we've been talking about here over the last little bit back into there's a business kind of component to this whole thing as well. And I'll highlight this next week at our advisor conference in Tampa, and that is, look, we're dealing with these tidal forces of change that are coming at our industry, and it's everything from hyper competition, race for scale, fee compression, product commoditization, digitization, and the like. These are complex issues, and I think in order for the industry and then just our firm, one layer down, to be able to navigate these tidal forces is really going to require a team that's made up of people from different backgrounds and experiences. We're going to benefit from fresh and unique ideas. You're going to get a team that can address problems in new and innovative ways. You got a wider range of skill sets to draw on, tackle a variety of challenges. Again, like those tidal forces that I was just referring to. And so, that is another element to this whole conversation that we actually probably didn't really even explore through it.
Absolutely. I mean, the research and the science will say organizations that are coming at things from a diverse perspective, and drive that diversity component typically perform better, typically, have higher levels of engagement, typically are more prone to find creative solutions to problems because there's that diversity of thought. So, there's some hard and soft reasons why, diversity just simply makes sense. And I'm happy to be at an organization where sort of we recognize that and we're working hard to sort of, capture that ability to leverage that skill set.
Robin, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. A great chat, as I knew it would be, thought-provoking, and a super important topic, and one that's very near and dear to my heart. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.